The sunlight was gentle that morning, spilling through the narrow curtains like it had nowhere else to go. I stood in the corner of my bedroom, the dress draped over my arm, feeling the fabric shift slightly in the warmth. My fingers lingered on the folds, tracing the subtle weave. It was simple, elegant in its own quiet way. Nothing flashy, nothing that could draw a crowd. But I had bought it with my own small triumphs, the careful savings of months stitched into every seam. I had imagined wearing it to the party tonight, imagining a smile I might see reflected back in the polished mirrors, imagining myself moving through the room without feeling invisible. And then I heard her. My daughter stepped into the doorway, eyes sharp, voice sharper. "A dress for poor people," she said. And just like that, the quiet morning fractured. Her words hovered between us, sticky and accusing. The air seemed heavier, and for a moment I could only hear the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint creak of the floorboards under her weight. She didn't look at me. She never did when she wanted to hurt and hide it at the same time. I felt the sting, though. More than I expected, more than a mother should, maybe. It wasn't about the dress. It never was. It was about being seen, about being valued, about all the small compromises and sacrifices I had made, the ones she would never know, stacked quietly behind these walls. The room fell silent after her words. I didn't answer. I never do in moments like this. Silence can carry more than noise. Silence can hold shame. Silence can hold pride, too, if you let it. I folded the dress carefully, holding it close to my chest. It felt heavier than it should, weighted with her judgment and my own quiet dignity. My hands lingered on the hem, and I could almost feel the rhythm of the months it took to earn it, the evenings of ironing uniforms, of washing dishes until my fingers ached, of holding my tongue while the world moved past me. Then I stepped out, quietly. I didn't want an argument. I didn't want a lecture. I wanted to leave behind the small prison of her words and carry this dress into the sunlight. Outside, the morning air was still, but it held a hint of something else, something soft and forgiving. I held the dress over my arm, the folds catching the light in a way I hadn't noticed in the shadows of my bedroom. The sunlight danced across the fabric, making it look almost alive. I could see the shimmer of possibility, the quiet promise that it might be more than what she had called it. I walked slowly down the street. Each step felt measured. Each breath tasted faintly of freedom. The neighbors waved, polite smiles, small greetings. But I was moving past them, past the everyday rhythm of life, carrying something fragile and strong all at once. The dress brushed against my arm, soft and insistent. I imagined it telling a story of endurance, of hidden worth. I imagined it walking into the party ahead of me, announcing my arrival in ways words never could. Her words still lingered. A dress for poor people. I could hear them echoing behind me, faint but sharp, like a bell struck too close to the ear. But here, in the sunlight, the dress seemed to respond differently. It didn't carry shame. It carried possibility. I remembered the small victories of my life, the times I had chosen silence over argument, patience over rage, kindness over resentment. I remembered the nights I had stayed awake, counting pennies and worries, and the mornings I had risen, anyway, offering the world what little I had. And in that memory, the dress felt lighter. Not empty, not flashy, but honest, true. Something that could move through a room without pretense and still be noticed. I passed a small cafe. The smell of coffee and bread drifted out as the door opened and closed. For a moment, I imagined sitting there, folding the dress over the back of a chair, sipping slowly, letting the morning be quiet and simple. But I didn't stop. Not yet. The street curved, sunlight spilling unevenly across the cracked pavement. Shadows leaned in from the trees, brushing against the folds of my dress. And I realized something I hadn't before. It didn't matter what she thought. Not really. What mattered was what I believed, what I carried with me into the world. I thought about the party waiting ahead, the polished floors, the soft music, the clusters of people laughing quietly into their glasses. I imagined stepping in, quietly, deliberately, letting the dress speak before my voice did. The thought made my chest tighten, a mix of fear and anticipation curling like smoke inside me. But I kept walking, one step at a time. The wind caught a stray hair against my cheek. I brushed it away, unconsciously smoothing the dress over my arm. The light caught it again, fleeting, like a secret being shared with no one else. Her judgment, sharp and sudden this morning, was still weight in my chest. But it was different now. It was a shadow I could see, separate from the sun and the dress and the streets I walked. It had no power here. Not in this light. Not in this moment. I paused at a corner, feeling the quiet hum of the city around me. Cars passing, voices muted, the distant bark of a dog. The dress hung softly against my side, catching the light again, folding in on itself like it knew the story I wanted to tell. I imagined her at home waiting, maybe realizing that the mother she thought she knew was stepping out into a different light, maybe not realizing, maybe never realizing. But I felt a small, quiet satisfaction. The weight in my hands was no longer shame. It was resolve. Every fold, every seam, every thread was a reminder that I had survived, that I had earned the small elegance, that I could carry myself through a room full of whispers and still be whole. I took a deep breath, the kind that fills the lungs and settles the mind. The dress swayed slightly as I shifted my grip, the morning light gleaming along its surface. I could almost hear it whispering back at me, soft and calm. You belong here. You always did. The street ahead opened into a larger avenue, sunlight pouring over the pavement, over the cars, over the scattered pedestrians, and I walked into it slowly, deliberately. Not running, not hiding, not pleading, just walking, holding something that had once been mocked, now full of quiet possibility. I wondered what it would feel like when I arrived, when faces turned, when whispers followed. Would the dress change the way they saw me, or just remind them of what they expected? I didn't know. I couldn't know. But I held it close, letting the weight settle into something calm, something sure. I passed a small cafe. The water sparkled, like tiny diamonds, catching the light in unpredictable ways. For a moment I stopped, letting the world move around me. The dress hung still, but somehow alive in the light, promising that tonight could be different, that I could be different. And then, slowly, I walked on. Each step was quiet but firm, each breath steady, each fold of the dress a small victory over silence, over shame, over words that tried to wound me before I even left the house. I thought of her again, the daughter who had sneered at me this morning. I didn't feel anger, not anymore. Only a curious, quiet hope that maybe, just maybe, the world outside my door would tell a different story than the one she had tried to write. The sunlight caught the dress again, briefly, just for a moment, and I thought it smiled, not at her, not at me, but at the possibility that some things, simple and honest, can hold their own story in the quietest way. And I kept walking. The morning stretched ahead, waiting for me to step into it fully, the folds of the dress shifting like they had their own life, ready to meet the world.
The hotel room was quiet, though the laughter and soft music from the party outside seeped through the thin walls. I stood in front of the tall mirror, the dress draped carefully over my shoulders, the folds falling just as I had imagined. My fingers brushed the fabric, smoothing it, adjusting it, tracing the seam along my waist. It was soft against my skin, familiar, yet foreign in this new light. I caught my reflection and paused. The woman looking back wasn't the same one who had left home this morning. She was older, yes, but also steadier. There was a certainty in her posture, a quiet strength in the line of her jaw, and yet the eyes. The eyes still held a flicker of doubt, a question lingering quietly beneath the surface. The floor beneath my feet creaked softly, like it remembered the footsteps of someone less certain, someone who had spent decades trying to stay invisible. I inhaled slowly, letting the scent of the hotel room, faint soap, polished wood, and a whisper of perfume fill my senses. I tried to remind myself that I had earned this moment, that I had earned the right to be here. Through the walls, I could hear the soft murmur of conversation, punctuated by occasional laughter. It was polite, gentle, a life I had watched from the outside more than I had ever lived. My daughter had always moved effortlessly through it, confident, unbothered. And here I was, standing in a room I didn't yet belong to, questioning every step I would take once I walked out the door. I reached up to smooth the neckline of the dress, my fingers lingering against the fabric as memories pressed in. The nights I had spent folding laundry by dim kitchen light, ironing collars until my hands ached, counting pennies and sacrifices, they all whispered in the quiet. And now this dress, this small luxury, held all of it. It was more than just cloth. It was a testament to endurance, to quiet victories that no one else had seen. I adjusted the hem, feeling the way it settled around my legs. The reflection shifted as I turned slightly, and for a fleeting second I didn't recognize her. This version of me seemed unshakable, yet fragile in the same breath. She was poised, deliberate, but there was a hesitancy in her gaze that betrayed the anxiety tucked deep inside. I wondered briefly if the world outside would see her too, or if they would simply pass her by. The sound of heels clicking on marble reached my ears, distant yet distinct. A server, perhaps, or one of the guests making their way through the corridors. The sound made me acutely aware of my own heartbeat, slow, steady, but uncertain. I pressed my palm to the mirror, feeling the cool glass beneath my fingers, searching for reassurance where there was none. I thought about my daughter, her words from earlier still echoing faintly in my mind. A dress for poor people. They weren't cruel, exactly, not in the way people scream at each other in anger, but they were sharp, like a blade sliding under the skin. I could feel the memory of them now mingling with the scent of polished wood and my own quiet breath. I took a step back and turned slowly, letting my eyes scan the room. The walls were pale, almost forgiving, the curtains drawn to let in the late afternoon light. Dust motes floated lazily in the shafts of sun, catching and scattering like tiny fragments of memory suspended in the air. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning, a low, steady reminder that I was alive, that I had arrived. But the unease remained, a subtle, insistent doubt that whispered, "Will they notice me? Will they see me, or will I be invisible?" I tried to shake it, moving my hands to adjust the sleeves, the folds of the dress, the way it fell against my waist. Every gesture was deliberate, controlled, and yet control was not comfort. I remembered the long nights I had spent imagining moments like this. Not in grand gestures, not in laughter and applause, but in small details, the feel of fine fabric against my skin, the subtle play of light on polished surfaces,
the quiet self-possession that comes from finally standing in a place you've earned. I had dreamed of it for years, but dreams are lighter than reality. Reality presses against your chest, demanding attention, questioning your worth. I sat briefly on the edge of the hotel bed, letting the fabric of the dress slide through my fingers. It was heavier than it seemed, weighted with anticipation, with fear, with memory. I thought about walking into that party, about the eyes that would fall on me, the whispers that might follow. I wondered if anyone would see beyond the surface, beyond the dress, to the quiet history stitched into every seam. A knock at the door startled me. Not loud, not urgent, but enough to make me jump. My reflection wavered as I turned toward it, heart tight. I opened the door slowly, half expecting to see a guest, half expecting no one. It was only housekeeping. A polite smile and a soft bow of the head. They didn't linger. I closed the door again, but the echo of the knock lingered in my chest. I moved back to the mirror, standing taller now, pressing my palms into my hips as if the motion could steady the tremor I felt inside. The reflection stared back, silent, patient. Older, yes, but also carrying the fragility of someone who had spent a lifetime proving her place to herself. My fingers brushed the neckline again, and I thought about the hours it took to earn this dress, the patience it took to fold it neatly in my bag, and the care it demanded because it was mine. All mine. The muffled laughter outside swelled briefly, then softened again. I realized I was holding my breath. Slowly, deliberately, I let it out. The air in the room shifted with me, small currents of cool brushing my skin, the fabric of the dress moving gently against my arms. I felt my pulse calm. I could do this. I had done so much already. I reached for the small purse I had set on the nightstand, adjusting the strap over my shoulder. My reflection followed every movement, careful, deliberate. I'd tried to imagine the room outside the hotel, bright, polished, full of people who would not know my story. And then I realized something. It didn't matter if they knew it. What mattered was that I carried it with me, quietly, without fanfare, without apology. I let my hands linger on the folds of the dress one last time. The fabric was soft, pliable, familiar. It had the memory of my nights, my mornings, my hands pressed against it when the world was heavy. It was proof that I had endured, that I could endure again and still remain myself. I stepped back from the mirror and adjusted my shoulders. The reflection seemed more certain now, less hesitant, not because the world had changed, but because I had. I straightened my spine, the slight tension in my chest easing. The woman in the mirror was not the girl who had left home this morning, unsure, doubting. She was someone quieter, stronger, carrying a history that gave her weight, even if the world outside had not yet noticed it. The laughter outside softened to a distant hum. I could hear glasses clinking now, low conversation, the shuffle of feet moving through the hallways. The dress moved gently as I shifted, catching the light in a way that felt almost like recognition. A small smile touched my lips, barely noticeable, but real. I reached for the door, my hand brushing the cool brass handle. One step at a time, I reminded myself. One step at a time and the world would follow. Or it wouldn't. It didn't matter. I had found something in that mirror I didn't expect, the quiet certainty that I could exist in a space that once felt impossible. The room was still, almost reverent. The light from the windows shifted as the sun continued its slow descent, brushing across the walls and the floor. Dust motes floated in the air, catching the last rays like tiny sparks of memory. I took a deep breath, feeling the fabric of the dress slide against my arms one final time. And then I opened the door. The hall outside was bright and warm, the soft murmur of the party seeping out as I stepped forward. Each step echoed lightly against the polished floor. I held the dress close, letting the folds settle, letting the light play across it. I felt the quiet confidence of someone who had earned this, who had waited for this, who had survived the small judgments and sharp words of others. I didn't know how it would be received. I didn't know if anyone would notice. But I stepped forward anyway, carrying with me the weight of years, of nights spent alone, of small victories no one applauded. The mirror had shown me something today. Something quiet, something real, something I could carry into the room ahead. And for the first time, I felt like I belonged, even if no one else yet knew it.
The hall was alive, but not in a way I had expected. Light fell in golden pools from crystal chandeliers, soft yet insistent. Shadows lingered in the corners, brushing against the walls like memory itself. Music hummed low and steady, a gentle current carrying the laughter of people I didn't know. I paused at the doorway. The dress clung softly at my shoulders, folds shifting with each tiny movement, catching the light just so. I could feel the weight of it, not heavy, but significant, like the history stitched quietly into the seams. My hands brushed the fabric, adjusting, smoothing, trying to breathe into it the confidence I had spent the morning searching for. Guests clustered in small groups, their voices low, punctuated by laughter and the clink of glasses. I noticed the subtle shimmer of jewelry on their wrists, the gleam of polished shoes on marble floors, the careful way they held their drinks, as if balance itself were a performance. And then I moved. Each step was deliberate, measured, my heels whispering against the floor. I kept my chin level, shoulders back, hands relaxed, but the muscles along my spine hummed with tension. Every breath felt like a small victory. In, out, steady. The room seemed to sense me, though not fully, not yet. But the air shifted, almost imperceptibly, like it had noticed a change in the pattern of movement. Some eyes fell on me, briefly, polite glances, curiosity brushing softly against their attention. Some looked away quickly, pretending indifference. A few lingered just long enough to register the quiet difference in me before returning to their conversations. I could feel them, sensing the life I carried under the folds of fabric, a history invisible but palpable. I caught a reflection in a mirrored panel across the room. My image floated there, soft and uncertain, yet deliberate. I adjusted the dress at my waist, letting the folds settle. There was a calmness in the gesture, a ritual I performed more for myself than anyone else. And still, the walls seemed to lean in. I could feel them, heavy and expectant, absorbing everything, every step, every measured breath. I moved past a group of women, their laughter soft but sharp, glancing at me over their shoulders. The whispers were subtle, almost courteous, but I felt their weight all the same. I kept walking. Step by step, shoulder aligned, eyes forward. The golden light brushed across my face, and I realized it was forgiving. Not everyone here would notice. Not everyone would care. But some would. And some, perhaps, might see the quiet story I had carried across the threshold. I passed a table where guests raised their glasses, murmuring polite greetings to one another. The music shifted slightly, a note higher, a pause in the rhythm, and suddenly the air changed. Almost imperceptibly, the room grew still, a quiet gap forming in the background hum of conversation. I felt it more than I saw it, like a subtle awareness, like the world was holding its breath. A man near the far corner shifted, adjusting his suit. His eyes flicked toward me and lingered just a fraction too long. I didn't flinch.
I didn't smile. I simply let him see what was there. Someone present. Deliberate. Neither intruding nor invisible. The shift was tiny, almost unnoticeable, but it was there. The walls themselves seemed to lean inward, listening, waiting. I could hear my own pulse in my ears now. Soft, but steady. My hands brushed the fabric at my side, fingers tracing the folds almost unconsciously. The light caught it in a way that made it shimmer softly. I realized I had never seen it like this before. Not in the bedroom mirror, not in the hotel hallway. In this space, surrounded by the noise and quiet of others, the dress became a voice. Not loud, not demanding, just present. I took a slow step forward, letting the rhythm of my movements settle into the room. Glasses clinked nearby, laughter rose and fell, and yet there was a faint tension beneath it all. Subtle and delicate, like the moment before a story unfolds. The guests moved around me, parting instinctively without knowing why. Some paused, some whispered. I didn't hear the words, only the faint swell of curiosity. A woman adjusted her necklace as I passed, her eyes meeting mine for a brief instant. There was a flicker there. Recognition, perhaps? Or surprise. I let it pass, letting the silence between us carry what words could not. She turned back to her conversation, but the moment lingered, a small tremor in the calm surface of the party. I moved toward the center of the room now, letting my presence settle into the rhythm of the space. Each step was measured, careful, like walking across ice, though the floor was solid beneath my heels. I noticed the scent of flowers on a nearby table, faint and delicate, the metallic tang of polished cutlery, the warmth of golden light brushing against skin. Everything was alive, but quiet, observing, waiting. I glanced at my reflection in a large window, the city lights outside blurred into soft gold and silver. My own image floated there, stronger than I had expected, quiet and deliberate. I adjusted the neckline of the dress, smoothing the folds along my waist. I could feel the tension in my shoulders ease slightly. I was here. I had arrived, not with fanfare, not with approval, not with applause. Just with the quiet weight of being present. And yet, beneath it all, a quiet unease lingered. The walls seemed to hold their breath. The chandeliers swayed slightly, though the air was still. Music rose and fell, but the spaces between notes carried a strange weight. I could feel the anticipation in the room, the small awareness of others noticing something subtle, something deliberate. I paused near a small cluster of guests, letting the movement of the room settle around me. They laughed quietly, murmured softly, but no one moved to interrupt. I could feel the gentle pull of attention, not forced, not loud, but persistent. It was a fragile thing, like sunlight catching a dust mote in the corner of a room, almost invisible, almost nothing, and yet undeniably there. I adjusted my posture again, letting my shoulders relax, letting the folds of the dress fall naturally. The fabric caught the light in ways I hadn't noticed before. A shimmer here, a shadow there. I could feel it responding to the space, moving with me, carrying me into the room without sound. It was subtle, but it mattered. A man at the far end of the hall glanced my way, raising his glass in what seemed a polite nod. I didn't smile. I simply acknowledged it with a gentle tilt of my head. He returned to his conversation, but the gesture lingered. Small, deliberate, quiet. Enough to remind me that I was seen, if only in fragments. I took another step forward, letting the room fold around me. The music, the laughter, the murmurs, all of it continued, but now it felt like it existed around me rather than against me. I felt the subtle shift of energy, like air bending slightly with each measured movement. The golden light caught the folds of the dress one more time, soft and forgiving, and I realized that presence itself could be a quiet kind of power. I paused near a table where glasses glittered under the light, listening to a faint murmur of conversation. The words didn't matter. What mattered was the awareness in the room, the subtle acknowledgement of someone who had stepped into a space she had always been told she didn't belong. I could feel the attention, almost imperceptible, brushing against the back of my mind, shaping something I hadn't yet named. A small smile touched my lips, barely noticeable, but real. I let it rest there, letting the air of the room catch it gently. No one applauded, no one noticed overtly, but I could feel the shift, the quiet awareness that comes when something unexpected appears simply by existing. The music shifted again, soft and deliberate, a pause in the rhythm that made the edges of the hall seem sharper, more focused. The walls, the mirrors, the chandeliers, the golden pools of light, all of it seemed to lean toward me just slightly, as if curious.
The room shimmered in golden warmth, the light from chandeliers spilling in gentle pools across the polished floor. Music hummed low, a delicate current beneath the chatter of guests, their laughter rising and falling like waves. I moved slowly, letting the folds of my dress sway against my legs, each step deliberate, each breath measured. And then I saw her. Across the room, my daughter paused mid-laugh, a flicker of surprise breaking the confident mask she always wore. Her eyes met mine, and for a fraction of a second, the world seemed to hold its breath. The glass in her hand trembled subtly, unnoticed by those around her. Her lips, usually so sure, parted slightly, caught between a smile and something else I couldn't name. I felt it before I understood it. A pang, sharp and soft at once. Of shame, yes, but also something quieter, something unexplainable. Satisfaction, maybe. Not triumph, not victory, but the small, almost imperceptible acknowledgement that she had seen me. Not the mother she had imagined, not the woman she had judged from afar, me. The air between us thickened, though the hum of conversation continued, oblivious. I watched her frozen in that delicate imbalance, as if time itself had slowed. The warmth of the chandeliers painted her face in gold, highlighting the faint flush creeping across her cheeks. The room moved around her, but she seemed still, suspended, caught in the gravity of a gaze she hadn't anticipated. I drew a slow breath, feeling the folds of my dress settle against my arms. Every fold seemed heavier, carrying the weight of mornings and nights she would never see, the quiet sacrifices, the silent endurance, the patient accumulation of moments that led to this one. I could almost hear them in the soft whisper of silk sliding over itself, a murmur of history tracing each seam. She blinked once, then twice. The smile she tried to maintain trembled, uncertain. The glass in her hand caught the light, a tiny prism, shaking in rhythm with her heartbeat, I imagined. And I realized in that suspended second that we were both strangers to each other here, not in the life we shared, not in the blood that tied us together, but in the truth of this moment. I didn't move. I didn't speak. I simply let her see me and let the room continue around us as though nothing had changed. Yet everything had shifted. The air between us carried weight now, delicate and sharp. The sound of laughter from a nearby group was distant, irrelevant, as if I were listening through water. I traced the seam of the dress at my waist absent-mindedly, feeling the texture, the soft resilience of the fabric beneath my fingers. I remembered the quiet mornings I had spent ironing shirts, the evenings spent counting coins, the nights spent keeping myself upright when the world seemed intent on shaking me down. This dress, so simple, so unassuming, held it all. And now it was alive, in this light, in this room, between us. Her eyes widened just slightly, her gaze flicking away, then back again. I caught the small catch in her breath, the tiniest hesitation that was otherwise invisible, unnoticed by anyone else. And still, I didn't step forward. I didn't smile. I didn't give her a single clue beyond my quiet presence. I let her interpret the moment herself. The soft clink of her glass against the edge of the table pulled me back into the space around us. I could see her shoulders stiffen, the flush creeping deeper, the careful choreography of her usual composure faltering. Not because of me, exactly, not because of anything I said, but because the world had shifted in a way she hadn't anticipated. And for a heartbeat, the balance of things she thought she controlled wavered. I felt another ping, subtle, almost guilty, threading through me. Shame, yes, for daring to appear, for daring to exist in a space where she had always assumed my place was secondary, but deeper than that, a quiet acknowledgement of presence. I was here. I had arrived, not flashy, not demanding, not seeking approval, simply existing, as I always had, but now visible in a way that mattered, if only to her. She looked away for a moment, caught in her own thoughts. I could see the tension in the curve of her shoulders, the tilt of her head. The music carried through the room, the soft clatter of glasses, the hum of polite conversation, but none of it mattered now. The gravity of that gaze, the brief tremor of recognition, it filled the space, subtle yet undeniable. I took a step closer to the center of the room, each movement slow, careful, deliberate. The dress swayed gently, soft folds brushing against my skin. The light caught it, highlighting the quiet elegance I had always known it possessed, even if she hadn't. I felt its weight, and in it, the history of my life, the small victories no one applauded, the patience, the endurance, the silent courage of years unnoticed. And then I caught the flicker in her eyes again. Hesitation, yes, but also something softer, something unspoken. Confusion, perhaps, mingling with curiosity. She had expected me to shrink, to fold, to cower, to exist only in the shadows she had imagined. But here I was, full, deliberate, quietly whole, and the world seemed to pause just for her, just for this moment. I let my gaze sweep across the room again, seeing her there, a figure poised and polished, yet unsettled. It was a fleeting image, a fragment, almost imperceptible, and I realized that the moment didn't need words. It didn't need explanation. The pause itself was enough. A delicate tension hung in the air, a fragile acknowledgement that things had shifted, subtly and irrevocably. I felt my own chest ease slightly, though my heartbeat remained alert. The dress settled around me, folds sliding softly against my arms, the warmth of the room, the golden light, the soft murmur of conversation, all of it framed the space between us, delicate, almost reverent. I could see the faint flush lingering on her cheeks, the subtle tightness in her jaw, and I understood finally that she had glimpsed something she hadn't expected, not me as she thought she knew me, but me as I had always been. Her glass wavered again, unnoticed by anyone else, and I realized she had no guide, no script, no rehearsed words to navigate this moment. She was facing a reality too subtle for applause, too quiet for comment, yet impossible to ignore. And in that realization, I felt something strange and fleeting. Satisfaction, yes, but tempered by love, by years of patience, by the faint ache of knowing that our bond had always been complicated. I didn't move.
I didn't speak. I allowed the tension to linger, letting her wrestle with it, letting the room breathe around us. Time seemed to stretch, each second deliberate, weighted, intimate. The golden light traced the edges of her hair, the soft curve of her cheek, the trembling of her glass, and I held my own quiet stillness, letting it anchor me. Then, almost imperceptibly, she shifted. A small gesture, a step back, a breath drawn, a tightening of her lips, nothing dramatic, nothing confrontational, just the faint acknowledgement that she had noticed me, that she had registered my presence in a way that unsettled her carefully rehearsed world. I felt another pang of empathy, of connection, of the delicate recognition that we were, in this moment, mirrored in subtle ways. I took a slow step forward, letting the dress slide softly against my legs. The room continued around us, oblivious, polite, alive, yet the space between us remained suspended, delicate and charged. I could feel it in my own pulse, in the quiet hum of my breath, in the gentle sway of the fabric at my side. Presence itself, I realized, could speak volumes when words failed. I glanced at her once more. The flush lingered, the tremor in her hand persisted, and I felt a quiet satisfaction, not of triumph, not of victory, but of recognition. She had seen me, truly, even if only for a fraction of a second. And in that recognition, the world had shifted, subtle and irrevocable, between us. I allowed a small, almost imperceptible smile to touch my lips, soft and quiet, no words, no gesture, just presence. And then I let the moment rest, delicate, suspended, unresolved. A pause that carried its own weight, fragile and sharp, as if the air itself was holding its breath. And in that stillness, I understood. This was only the beginning. The pause would linger, delicate and charged. And what would follow, reconciliation, conflict, understanding, or further unease, remained unwritten, hovering quietly in the golden warmth of the room. I breathed in slowly, steadying myself, letting the folds of the dress settle against my arms. I was here, present, seen, even if only in fragments.
The room was warm, alive with soft golden light spilling from the chandeliers above. It pooled on polished floors, sliding across glass and silver, across dresses and suits, across hands that held wine too carefully. Music hummed low in the background, soft and insistent, like a heartbeat under the hum of conversation. I moved through it slowly, step by step, deliberate, letting the folds of my dress brush softly against my legs. Every sound of my heels against the floor echoed faintly, a quiet metronome keeping pace with my pulse. I felt the weight of the dress around me. Not heavy, but significant. The years, the mornings, the nights, folded into the fabric, stitched into the seams. I noticed the guests as I passed. Their eyes glanced briefly at me, polite, curious, some careful to look away. I didn't seek their attention. I let it come, gently, naturally, as though the room itself were learning to notice. And then I heard it, a whisper, delicate and sharp, cutting through the soft murmur of voices. How? Her voice, my daughter, it carried shock, disbelief, maybe even a trace of regret. I didn't respond. I didn't turn. I simply let the words float to me, carrying their weight quietly, like a soft wind brushing against my cheek. The world seemed to pause for a heartbeat, the music dipping slightly, laughter softening at the edges. I moved through it slowly. The chandeliers shimmered, catching the light in gentle prisms, scattering it across polished surfaces. The scent of perfume floated in subtle currents, floral and sweet, delicate but insistent. I noticed the faint echo of my shoes on the floor, the gentle brush of fabric against my arms. The room was alive in ways I had never truly seen before. Her whisper repeated in my mind, soft and incredulous. How? How had I arrived here, in this space she had always thought beyond my reach? I felt a quiet satisfaction, tempered with shame, with the faint ache of memories she would never know. Mornings spent saving pennies, nights spent working silently while the house slept. Years of endurance stitched invisibly into every moment of my life. The crowd seemed to notice subtly. Murmurs rose around me, soft and uncertain. Some glanced at the dress, its simple elegance catching the light in a way that demanded attention without asking for it. Others glanced at me, noticing something quiet and deliberate in the way I moved, the calm certainty I carried. I felt a subtle shift in the air, like the room itself had leaned in to observe. I adjusted the folds at my waist, letting the dress fall naturally. Its texture slid against my fingers, familiar yet alive in this space, shimmering in the golden light. I realized then that the dress had become more than fabric. It had become a vessel, of history, of patience, of years unacknowledged. And now it was speaking, softly, to anyone willing to notice. Her eyes found mine across the room. She didn't look away immediately. There was a tension there, a small falter in the posture she had perfected over years. Her lips pressed together, her hand tightening slightly around the glass she held. A flush crept across her cheeks, slow and deliberate, betraying the shock under her practiced composure. I felt the weight of it in my chest, a pang, sharp and soft at once. Shame, yes, for daring to appear. Pride, yes, quiet and understated for simply existing in a way she had not expected. The room continued around us, oblivious, polite, alive. But the space between us held a new energy, delicate and potent, like sunlight catching dust motes in still air. I stepped forward slow, careful. The heels echoed faintly, a soft rhythm guiding me. The folds of the dress swayed gently, brushing against my arms and legs. I noticed every detail now, the shimmer of glass on tables, the subtle glint of jewelry in golden light, the hum of conversations that rose and fell like gentle waves. Even the air itself seemed textured, carrying the faint scent of flowers and polished wood, carrying the almost imperceptible pulse of attention. Her whisper lingered in my mind. How? How had I, so quietly, arrived here? I felt the years stretch behind me. Each sacrifice, each patient moment, each quiet endurance now visible in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. The dress had become a mirror of my life. Each fold and seam reflected patience, quiet strength, and a presence that demanded acknowledgement without asking for it. The murmurs of the guests rose softly, almost curious, almost polite. Some glanced at me again, noting the deliberate calm of my movement, the soft sway of fabric against skin. Others lingered, curiosity brushing against their attention like a shadow. The room responded subtly, shifting around me. Not dramatic, not loud, but undeniable. I caught her gaze again. The flush on her cheeks deepened, her hand trembling slightly around the glass. She opened her mouth once, then closed it, as if the words she intended to speak had been swallowed by the room itself. And in that moment I understood. She was seeing not the dress, not the surface, but the story it carried. She was seeing me, not the mother she had assumed, not the woman she had judged from a distance, but the quiet, deliberate presence I had always been. I felt a small, almost imperceptible smile touch my lips, soft and private. Not triumph, not victory, just acknowledgement. She had noticed. That was enough for now. The tension lingered, delicate, like a held breath, as if the room itself were waiting for what would come next. I let my gaze drift slightly, taking in the chandeliers, the polished floors,
the subtle interplay of light and shadow. Each detail seemed sharper now, alive with possibility. The air carried faint echoes of laughter, the delicate clink of glasses, the low hum of music, but beneath it all was a quiet tension, anchored in the suspended moment between my daughter and me. She shifted, small and tentative, a gesture almost too slight to notice. But I saw it. The tightening of her shoulders, the flicker of her eyes, the hesitant tilt of her head. She was grappling with something unspoken, trying to reconcile the mother she thought she knew with the women standing quietly before her. And I let her. I let the pause linger, delicate and charged, carrying all the words neither of us spoke. I took another slow step forward, letting the dress slide softly against my legs. The folds caught the light again, shimmering faintly, carrying history, patience, and quiet strength. I realized then that the dress had become more than fabric, and that perhaps she was beginning to understand this. Not fully, perhaps, but enough to feel the tremor of realization pass through her. Her whisper, "How?" echoed again, soft, almost lost among the hum of the room. But I felt it, heard it in the tremor of her hand, in the flush of her cheeks, in the small hesitation of her posture, and I understood, finally, that the weight of a lifetime unnoticed could indeed be carried in a single moment, in a single dress, in the quiet movement of a deliberate presence. I stopped near the center of the room, letting the attention settle subtly around me. Guests murmured softly, glances flicking my way, curiosity brushing against awareness. The music continued, the laughter rose and fell, the golden light shimmered, but the room had changed. Just slightly, irrevocably, in the quiet tension of recognition and presence. I breathed slowly, deliberately. In, out. Each fold of fabric seemed alive, catching the light in ways I had never noticed before. The dress carried more than elegance. It carried endurance, patience, subtle strength, the quiet accumulation of a life lived deliberately, often unseen. And now it was speaking, softly, to anyone willing to notice. I glanced at her once more. She was still, delicate and taut, her glass trembling lightly in her hand. I felt a pang of empathy, of connection, of the subtle acknowledgement that we were seeing each other differently now. Not with words, not with applause, just with quiet recognition. The room moved around us, oblivious, polite, alive. But we were suspended, delicate and fragile, in a small, quiet bubble of awareness. And I knew finally that appearances were never the measure of worth. The dress, simple and unassuming, had carried the weight of everything unseen. And now in this golden light, in this room full of murmurs, it had begun to tell its story. The room was warm, golden light spilling over polished floors and sparkling glasses. Music hummed softly, an invisible current beneath the chatter of guests. Laughter rose and fell like gentle waves, but the rhythm of it was broken for me now. I was watching her, my daughter. She stood across the room, poised, polished, a smile carefully rehearsed on her lips. But then, almost without warning, the world seemed to wobble. Her hand flew to her chest, trembling there like a bird caught in a sudden gust. Her knees bent, just slightly at first, then more. A subtle sway, easily missed if one wasn't paying close attention. But I saw it. A gasp cut through the hum of conversation, faint at first, then mounting. Guests murmured, their eyes flicking to her with concern, confusion, curiosity. The golden light pooled over her, catching the tremor of her fingers against her blouse, the sudden flush creeping across her cheeks. I didn't think. I moved. My steps were swift,
careful, a quiet urgency carrying me across the polished floor. The dress I wore whispered softly against my legs as I reached her, folding my arms around her in instinct, shielding her from the world without a word. The room slowed, though the music continued, though laughter hesitated and whispered murmurs spread. Time condensed around her small body, her wide eyes, her shallow breaths. She looked at me then, a fragile mixture of fear and surprise, a storm of emotions caught in a single glance. Her pulse beat fast beneath my fingers, rapid but steady. I felt it, the heat of it, the life of it, the fragility of this sudden collapse. I leaned closer, whispering nothing, saying nothing, simply being present. My hands rested lightly on her arms, grounding her, anchoring her to something real, tangible, quiet. Around us, the guests shifted. Some stepped back, uncertain. Others edged closer, murmuring, questions rising without words. Their concern was palpable, a tide rolling softly against the rocks of our suspended moment. And yet, I barely noticed them. My world had narrowed to her, to the tremor of her hands, the faint sheen of sweat along her temples, the pulse of her heartbeat against my own. Her eyes found mine again. The flush of embarrassment deepened, mingling with something harder to name. Shame, maybe? Or recognition? Understanding? I couldn't tell. And I didn't try. I simply held her steady, feeling the weight of her body against me, the rapid rhythm of her breath. She swayed again, faintly, and I adjusted my stance, holding her closer, careful not to alarm her further. Her small gasp pierced the space between us, a tiny sound that carried everything: surprise, fear, confusion. Her lips parted slightly, trying to form words, but none came. The world had collapsed into this narrow space, a golden spotlight isolating us from the soft murmurs, the clinking glasses, the low hum of music. I noticed the smallest details: the sheen of her hair catching the chandelier light, the subtle tremor of her fingers brushing against my arms, the quick, shallow inhale of her chest rising and falling. Each tiny movement told a story of tension, of vulnerability, of the sudden collapse of composure she had carried so carefully. A wave of warmth spread through me. Not anger, not frustration, not judgment, just presence. Just the quiet pull of instinct overriding pride, overriding the sting of her earlier words. I could feel the years of tension, of distance, dissolving in the simplicity of this moment. My daughter, fragile, reaching out for something unspoken, and me reaching back without hesitation. The crowd was distant now, a soft blur around the edges. Their murmurs were like water lapping against the shore, noticeable, but muted, irrelevant. I focused on her, on steadying her, on letting her know that she was safe, if only in this small, immediate way. Her knees pressed against mine lightly, and I felt the shift, adjusting to keep her upright. Her hand moved from her chest to mine, an unsteady anchor. Her eyes were wide, holding a storm of emotion. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The silence between us carried more than words ever could. Slowly, deliberately, I guided her toward a nearby chair. She sank into it, trembling faintly, her face flushed with a mix of fear and embarrassment. I knelt beside her, adjusting her posture, letting her rest against my hands. Her gaze met mine once more. This time there was a subtle shift. The shock was fading, leaving behind a residue of something quieter, recognition perhaps. A fleeting acknowledgement that the world wasn't as she expected, that her mother wasn't who she thought she was. The glance was brief, delicate, like the brush of a feather, yet it carried weight. She let out a small, shuddering breath, and I felt her shoulders relax just slightly. The tremor in her hands eased, her pulse slowed, though still rapid. I remained silent, offering presence rather than speech, letting her find balance in the quiet rhythm of breath and touch. The guests were still murmuring, some closer now, some stepping back, uncertain. But their voices were irrelevant. The room had shrunk to the space between her and me, a golden cocoon of light and quiet, of awareness and recognition. Her lips parted again, a whisper almost lost in the hum of conversation. I, she began, faltering, the words trailing into silence. I didn't fill it. I didn't need to. The space itself was enough, charged, delicate, intimate. I felt a subtle shift in her gaze, a soft acknowledgement, fleeting, almost imperceptible. Was it shame? Perhaps. Or understanding? Maybe both. The line between the two was thin, and in that moment, it didn't matter. What mattered was the recognition that had passed between us, unspoken but undeniable. I straightened slightly, offering her the support of my arms, letting her feel grounded. Her hand rested lightly on my hand, tentative but steadying. The tremor of her legs faded slowly, the flush of her cheeks eased, and the storm in her eyes softened. The music continued, the golden light shimmered across the room, the murmurs of guests rolled softly like distant waves. And yet, in that small, suspended space, everything felt intimate, deliberate, important. A moment carved out of time, delicate and fragile and utterly ours. I realized then that moments like this held more weight than any reprimand, any whispered criticism, any harsh word from the past. Presence, calm, understanding, these carried more than appearances ever could. And perhaps she was beginning to see that, in the quiet way her eyes had met mine, in the tremor of vulnerability that had passed through her, fleeting but undeniable. Her breathing slowed further, her pulse steadying beneath my hands. I felt the subtle ease of tension, the gentle release of something unspoken, the small acknowledgement that we were closer now, if only in this fragile, fleeting moment. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. Words could not carry what silence, what touch, what careful presence had already conveyed. I simply held her, steady and deliberate, letting the warmth of the room, the hum of conversation, the golden light and the gentle rhythm of breath carry us forward. Eventually, she leaned slightly into me, her head tilting, the faintest gesture of trust passing between us. It was small, almost imperceptible, but enough. Enough to anchor the moment, enough to let the room continue, enough to let her recover without shame or fear. I felt the soft brush of her hair against my hand, the subtle warmth of her skin, the gentle beat of her pulse. And I knew that this, quiet and deliberate, held more meaning than any confrontation, any lecture, any judgment ever could. A single, suspended moment, delicate and sharp, yet carrying the weight of recognition, understanding, and the faintest hint of reconciliation. I eased her fully into the chair, adjusting the folds of her dress, letting her settle. The tremor had passed, the flush remained, soft and lingering, a reminder of the fragility of appearances and the strength hidden beneath them. I allowed a small breath, slow and deliberate, to pass between us. The golden light pooled around her, the music hummed softly, the murmurs of guests rolled faintly in the background. And in that quiet space, I realized something subtle but profound. This moment, delicate and unspoken, carried more truth than all the years of judgment, expectation, and misunderstanding. I leaned slightly closer, offering a soft, steadying touch to her hand, and let the silence linger. She met my gaze one last time, eyes wide, searching, fragile yet tethered to something real, something undeniable, and then
The room hummed softly, golden light pooling in the corners, catching the glint of glasses and the shimmer of dresses. Conversation had resumed, but with a delicate caution, a gentle hesitance, like the tide pulling back after a sudden wave. Laughter floated above, muted, polite, careful not to intrude. She sat quietly in her chair, the tremor of her body barely noticeable now, a soft flutter of breath and movement. Her friends hovered around her, whispered words of concern spilling like tiny streams across the polished floor. Hands brushed shoulders, murmurs softened, and somewhere between apology and worry, the room had shifted slightly, unspoken but unmistakable. I stood nearby, hands folded loosely at my sides. The soft weight of my dress brushed against my legs as I shifted subtly, adjusting stance. I was aware of myself, my presence, deliberate, calm, anchored. A quiet authority settled over me, unexpected but natural, like a house that had weathered storms and learned to hold its own silence. The music carried on, the clink of glasses continued, but I noticed the subtler details. The shadow of her hair against the chair, the slight angle of her head as her gaze found me, the faint tremor of her hand resting on the armrest. Every movement was small, deliberate, revealing, and I watched without judgment, simply taking in the scene. I could feel the tension lingering in the corners of the room, delicate, almost imperceptible. It was not loud, not dramatic, but there, stretching quietly like shadows in the last light of evening. The people around us moved as though on tiptoe, aware of something they could not name. And I understood. The room was noticing, responding, silently acknowledging a shift. She looked up at me briefly, eyes wide, searching, hesitant. I held her gaze with soft steadiness, letting it linger, letting the silence carry more than words ever could. There was no rush, no need to speak. The smallest gestures, a tilt of the head, a deepening of the gaze, the faintest exhale conveyed more truth than the entire room could contain. I noticed the angle of her hand. It shook slightly, though the movement was almost imperceptible, a subtle sign of her recovery, of her vulnerability, of the unspoken weight she carried now. And in that tiny tremor, I saw acknowledgement, recognition, a quiet understanding that the woman before her was not the figure she had mocked, nor the mother she had assumed she knew. She was something else entirely, composed, resilient, unyielding without force. The murmurs of the guests rose and fell, soft and cautious. Apologies floated near her chair, delicate, polite, fragments of voices carrying concern and discomfort. She nodded faintly to them, not fully engaging, her eyes still seeking mine across the distance of a few paces. I stood still, offering a calm presence, allowing her space and time, letting the room carry its own awareness without intruding. The soft rustle of fabric against skin, the delicate shuffle of chairs, the faint clink of glasses, each sound punctuated the quiet authority I felt settle over me. I was aware of every detail, every subtle shift in light and shadow. The chandelier overhead caught glimmers of movement, scattering small prisms across the walls and polished surfaces, like scattered fragments of time. She adjusted her posture slowly, a careful shift in the chair, the tiniest sign of grounding herself. Her hand rested lightly on the armrest, shaking less with each passing moment. I felt the pull of empathy, of understanding, but also the quiet satisfaction of presence, of endurance. I had moved through years of judgment, years of whispered critiques and quiet underestimation, and now, in this room, my presence carried weight. Not demanded, not loud, but undeniable. I let my gaze sweep the room, noticing the subtle reactions of others. Heads turned slightly as they caught sight of me, fleeting recognition, polite acknowledgement. Yet the focus remained with her, the small, fragile figure adjusting to equilibrium, trembling softly, yet recovering, anchored by the quiet stability I offered. The tension in the air was delicate.
It lingered, stretching across the golden light like a faint shadow, a reminder of the moment that had passed, the collapse that had shifted perception, however subtly. She watched me still. Her eyes traced the lines of my face, the soft fall of fabric, the calm in my posture. What did she truly see now? The mother she had mocked? Or someone unrecognizable, carrying dignity in quiet layers, folded into presence rather than speech? I stepped slightly closer, just enough for her to feel my presence without intrusion. The hem of my dress whispered softly against the polished floor. I offered a small, measured smile. Nothing dramatic, nothing performative, just acknowledgement. Quiet and real. She blinked, eyes narrowing ever so slightly, as if weighing this new reality, measuring the distance between perception and truth. Her hand rested lightly on the chair, but I could see the subtle tension still lingering in her fingers. A flicker of fear? Embarrassment? Perhaps. Or maybe just the remnants of a sudden realization that the mother she had assumed she knew had quietly become someone else, someone steady, deliberate, present, unshakable without force. I breathed slowly, deliberately. The air carried faint traces of perfume, of polished wood, of golden light, all mingling softly around us. The sound of conversation ebbed and flowed, polite but tempered, carrying a quiet curiosity toward what had just occurred. Yet none of it mattered. The world had shrunk to the small distance between us, delicate and charged, heavy with unspoken acknowledgement. I noticed the curve of her lips as she exhaled softly, a fleeting moment of tension releasing. It was imperceptible, yet profound, a subtle thaw after the aftermath of shock. Her gaze softened slightly, not fully, but enough to carry the hint of understanding. The room continued. The music, the murmurs, the clinking of glasses, all continued, and yet in the golden haze of light, there was a new balance, quiet and fragile, anchored in mutual recognition. I let my presence remain steady, deliberate. No words passed between us, none were needed. The air carried everything we had not spoken: endurance, patience, subtle strength, quiet dignity. She adjusted her shoulders, small, almost imperceptible, grounding herself. Her tremor in her hand eased further, the flush of her cheek softening in the light. Around us, the guests resumed their movements, polite and careful, leaving space while still hovering near enough to offer concern. I remained a quiet anchor, deliberate and calm, watching her reclaim composure. The golden light wrapped around us both, scattering across polished floors and glass surfaces, painting the room in a warm, almost sacred glow. I felt the subtle authority settle fully into my body, unforced, natural, not domineering, not loud, just presence. The kind that comes from enduring, from surviving, from quietly moving through years of doubt and judgment. And in that presence, I realized the power of quiet, deliberate acknowledgement, a presence that spoke volumes without raising a voice. She looked at me again, this time lingering longer, the flash of comprehension in her eyes unspoken, but undeniable. The tiny gestures, a soft blink, a slight shift in posture, the faint exhale, carried all the weight of realization. She was seeing more than a mother. She was seeing someone who had quietly survived, endured, and now stood present, steady, and unshakable without force. I stepped back slightly, offering the space for her to reclaim the room, the moment, herself. My dress whispered against the floor as I shifted my weight. The golden light pooled around her, catching the subtle tremor of her hand one last time before it eased entirely. And then, just a breath later, she was still, quiet, grounded. The room hummed again. Conversation resumed, music continued, light flickered softly across polished surfaces. Yet in that gentle haze, there was a subtle tension lingering in the corners, like shadows stretching in the last light of day. Delicate, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. I allowed myself a slow breath. My hands rested lightly at my sides, my posture steady. The moment had passed, yet its weight remained, subtle, enduring.